Two Davids Walk Into a Bar was filmed in front of a live studio audience.
This is David Anderson, and you're listening to Two Davids Walk Into a Bar. With me, as always, is Mr. David Lawler. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm good. It's good here. It's about 40 or maybe about 40 degrees. Are you still stuck in the Overlook Hotel over there?
No, everything's great here now. I'm safe. I was able to sweep and get the driveway. I'm able to get up my driveway, able to get up that hill, which was scary. That was finally fixed. So everything is back to normal as long as it doesn't snow again.
Are you talking about the hill up to your house or the hill on your road?
Okay, there is a hill. There's a main street, and then there's a big steep hill, and it snowed and iced, and it was almost impenetrable. And then it was basically like a wall of sort of ice and snow, and you couldn't get.
Okay, so you have like an angle of elevation over there in Washington State anyway, because of Washington State being very mountainous. So can I ask you?
Yes.
When you bake a cake, do you have to follow the high altitude directions?
No, I'm not high altitude.
It's
It's just the hills. It's dips and peaks and dips and peaks. It's not necessarily we're not necessarily up high. There's mountains, and then that's up high. But we're kind of we're in the sort of the Puget Sound area, but a lot of hills and then there's lots of like twisty turny roads with all ditches and everything. So yeah, that's a whole thing. So but everything's fine. I'm safe. I'm fine. How are you?
We're sending a squad up.
Negative. We have a reactor leak here, largely very dangerous. Okay, you can hear these, or you can read these great articles called Vintage Cable Box. Ow! You can read these great articles called Vintage Cable Box, and they talk about these. Mr. Lawler talks about his cable memories, and you can find them on blissville.net and vhsrewind.com. And they will be a great reference, sort of almost like a companion piece to this series that we're doing, which is the history of cable.
Are you? You sound a little bit under the weather. Your throat sounds a little bit scratchy.
Well, it depends on when you catch me in the day. It's been a rough few days, with the snow, and then I work, and I thought I was sultry tonight.
Sultry? Oh, you sound a little bit, couple of glasses of whiskey.
No, I'm not a drinker.
A couple of packs of cigarettes over there. As I start to sound, as we get into recording, like maybe 30 minutes in, I'll start to get a little like that.
Well, I got my fiber drink, so I'm loose and I'm ready now.
Okay, all right. Loose as a goose and ready to go.
Yeah.
So this is a continuation of the basic cable stuff. We did one episode last time that I had to break up into two episodes because we were going on. So I decided to try and plan this a little bit more.
Yeah.
So this will be the first part of another two-part series, which will end with the next episode after this. But I did want to talk a little bit about CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, started by Pat Robertson, who fought as a Marine during the Korean War. And he established the Christian Broadcasting Network in 1960 in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And he started it by doing basically, I guess, what Ted Turner did, which was
I was going to say that. Yeah, buy up a UHF station. UHF, and there's other sort of Christian channels, like I'm thinking like TBN, where they start
Bible
off
Network.
They buy up a UHF station. Now TBN is more sort of a terrestrial broadcast. They're not necessarily, I mean, they're on cable and probably on satellite, but they are more of a sort of a terrestrial TV station oriented kind of thing, much like EWTN.
And we kind of knew we knew a little bit about Pat Robertson anyway, because we were down in Tennessee and we got all those stations, and sometimes some of his programs would wind up on TNN, the Nashville network. Very early in the morning, it would show religious stuff, and even today you see religious programming like in the middle of the night leading into the morning.
I'm thinking 700 Club, because that was what they did. And if I remember correctly, and we'll get to it later, okay, so he put 700 Club on his channel, on his CBN channel,
right?
And then part of the contract, when the channel finally got bought up by, I think at the time, I can't remember the company. It was like Group W or something. Like it's changed hands a few times.
Yeah, actually, the 700 Club did syndicate.
A company bought up, when they bought up CBN, like part of the contract was they have to show the 700 Club every morning. So even in the permutation of what it is now, which I believe is Freeform, I think they still show 700 Club every morning.
Yeah, anything that is considered a like a satellite of CBN. Now, speaking of satellites, I believe it says in my notes that it was one of the first cable channels to distribute its signal nationally through satellite transmission, a method first pioneered by HBO in 1975, as well as the first national basic cable originated network. TBS became the second. We had it, and we had it as. I know they had it in parts of Philadelphia and New Jersey. We had it, of course, in Tennessee, and we have it up here in New York. So it's always been a ubiquitous presence. Even then, that didn't matter because 700 Club, I remember being run on regular television.
Oh yeah, that was a whole other thing where they put it on a whole bunch of stations. They'd buy up the time, I guess.
This was a time when you had televangelists, so
yes.
it makes sense that if you would have like an all news 24-hour station like CNN, you should have an all religion 24-hour station with CBN or something like that.
Now which channel, and maybe this is the same guy. I'm thinking like Jack Van the guy
Jack Van
that
Imp?
does...
Oh, yeah, Jack Van Imp would. He was another guy who would run in the mornings and middle of the night and also have a program on CBN. Grabbed everything that was religious, and because of that, it really had a lot of problems with its reputation later on, especially at the end of the 80s when these people like Jim Baker from PTL and Jimmy Swaggart were caught doing things they shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah, and then somehow Pat Robertson kind of came out on top of this. Like he basically just either bought them up or like he was partially like is him and a couple other guys like they basically
Robertson was a very shrewd businessman.
Now I'm not saying that that they didn't do what they did. But I'm saying that, they certainly probably helped it along. As far as Jim Baker, they probably like, well, hey, he did this too, kind of thing. And that's fine, If you're going to be hoisted on your own petard, if you did something bad, you shouldn't have done it,
well, being Christian, they should all have one boss. And I don't mean Mr. Robinson. I mean the man who's responsible for keeping Hebrew National hot dogs kosher. So Christian Broadcasting actually, and this is what leads us into our next discussion here, which is that they were responsible for the Family Channel, the first iteration of the Family Channel, which was called the CBN Family Channel.
Yeah.
Which then was rebranded, I guess, maybe in 85 as the Family Channel.
When they became the Family Channel, were they fully owned were they still a fully Christian channel?
They were fully owned by CBN because they also ran the 700 Club, of course.
Yeah.
Every morning, it was just part of the thing. But then they would go on to family shows. It would be lots of cartoons, some religious programming, but not like overtly religious. Like sort of like we're going to give you an after-school special, but Jesus is the hero of the show. That kind of thing. Just things like that. And then moving on to kind of some of the lesser-known comedy shows of. Like the 50s or something, like stuff that they don't really show anymore. Like
the stuff that
like Jack Benny, they would show Jack Benny, they would show Ernie Kovacs, that kind of stuff.
Whatever values they thought were promoted on these shows in the 50s when everybody was all super uptight.
Yeah, the Eisenhower years. So the Family Channel is then acquired by News Corp, which runs Fox, and then becomes the Fox Family Channel.
Fox Family Channel? But again, it's in the contract of like you must show 700 Club every morning, and it's still on. I'm sure if you go to it now, it's probably still on. What do you remember?
Do you remember any specific programming from the Fox Family Channel? Because I don't really know that time period.
Okay, here's what I remember. And they would, by the time they became more sort of an overall sort of entertainment channel, I remember they bought up the rights to show Young Indiana Jones. I remember that because they kind of packaged them as TV movies because Young Indiana Jones, they didn't even burn off the last few episodes because I guess ABC didn't care. So they kind of repackaged them and turned them into TV. So I was able to finish off and watch those shows. Most of them were the ones that nobody cared about when it was like the young Indiana Jones with him and his dad. And stuff like that. And I remember watching those. Let's see what. Oh, you know what? They would buy up like Year Without Santa Claus, like the Rankin Bass stuff. They would show stuff. Stuff like that.
The Christmas that wasn't that bad, and its sequel, The Christmas That Really Kicked Ass. Fox Family Channel was then sold to Disney in 2001 and became ABC Family. Now, ABC Family, I do remember quite. that there were quite a few shows on there that Regan did watch.
And we talked about this earlier. And they would have original programming. There was a show called Kyle XY. I remember that.
There was some show with Melissa Joan Hart too. Melissa Joan Hart and Joey Lawrence. And I forgot the name of the show.
Yeah, I remember that. It was one of those things where it's like certain people would enjoy this show. It's not necessarily.
Oh, and then
made
they would
for
show
me.
they would show reruns of Whose Line Is It Anyway?
That's true
Because
it was also
Bronwyn watched it while she was pregnant with Regan.
It was an ABC show. Well, yeah, originally it was a British show, but eventually it would become it was an ABC. And I think it's funny thing is.
Yeah, we're talking about the Drew Carey one here, not the other.
The Drew Carey one, and the funny thing is that's still on. It's now, I believe, on the CW. I just happened to be flipping to him. I was like, "Hey, this is a new episode on the CW."
Yeah, they brought. I
that
guess
show
they
never
brought it back.
dies. Great show, by
with
the way.
his friends. You know, his improvisation friends and
Gave
people.
us Wayne Brady.
Wayne Brady. I'm Wayne Brady, bitch.
Wayne Brady, bitch.
Okay, so this happened, and I wasn't even aware of it, but ABC Family then became rebranded in 2015 as Freeform, I guess, which is still ABC Family, but they changed it.
They just changed the name.
This kind of leads back to the central idea that basic cable becomes a specialty market for anyone interested in one particular thing. Like, you can have your Christian broadcasting network, you can probably have your Jewish broadcasting network, you can have your Catholic broadcasting network, and you can have your different kinds of family stuff. Well, I prefer family like this, I prefer family like that.
Well, yeah, because it's like if you're a parent and you just like, okay, I want to put the kid in front of the TV and I want to feel like it's safe, and I want to just be able to put them there so I can maybe take a nap or like have a cry or something.
Yes.
So you just want to like put them in front of the TV. I know they're gonna adhere to a certain standard, and it'll be there, and then I can come back.
It was just sort of, whenever because. We both work at the time. I worked alternate shifts from my wife, so when my wife was at work, I was taking care of the baby. When I was at work, she was taking care of the baby. So we have things like ABC Family, we have Nickelodeon, Nick Jr., Noggin. I remember Noggin, Disney Channel, Disney Junior, Disney XD, and Disney Jailbait. So it was different. It was almost like you could have a child growing up through the years and just changing the channel to fit their demographic. And we talked a little bit about Bravo when we were talking about A&E because comparisons are inevitable, but it launched December 1st, 1980. We never had it at all in Tennessee until we came up to New York is when we got it. And this is most interesting. It started as a premium channel. It started as a premium channel like Disney, and it like Disney, it had a limited time schedule per day. So, but what it was in the beginning, it was again with that A&E stuff, public television, that kind of stuff.
Say it's probably very A&E-esque.
Fine culture, opera, singing la and all that.
This was before they fully embraced their gay side, I think.
Yeah. When did they start going gay? Was it the end of the 90s?
I think that I'm thinking around that time of the Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Time
that was around that was in the early 2000s,
and I think that basically what happened was they realized, okay, what is our audience? Like, I'm sure they do market research of like who is watching our show, and then they're probably like, it's a lot of gay dudes are watching our stuff because it's all like art. And
I would say that Bravo, where Lifetime catered to perhaps the flyover states, middle America, women.
Well, Lifetime
then Bravo would cater to wealthy, bored, socialite fag hags. Even producing content with them. They even made shows with them, like The Real Wives and all that stuff. Just like, I guess, like the kind of people that made 50 Shades of Grey an enormous success, you know? So you have Queer Eye for the Straight Guy becomes a big hit. And also there's The Real Wives stuff, Top Chef, which, Bronwyn actually still does watch, with the lovely Padma Lakshmi, who was on an episode of Enterprise and can't act. Bravo also showed movies. They also cut the movies. Don't really watch it now. I don't really watch it. I don't watch Bravo. I never really had much of an interest in Bravo.
I feel like there's got to be some show that I watched on Bravo a lot, and I can't remember what it was. It was obviously didn't make much of an impact, but I feel like there was something I watched on there. I don't even know if it was a gay show. It might have been. I don't know. But
it's somewhere. They got really, really gay. Video Hits 1, VH1.
Yeah, I have some memories of that.
Now, we didn't... Okay, did you have it when it was launched in 1985?
I did not, unless... When in 1985 was it launched?
January 1st.
Okay, yeah, we did not have it. Although...
Well, I have it here on your... It's on your thing.
Yeah, it's an 86 one. It should be in 86, because I remember we got it like early 86.
24-hour, what they call... contemporary music.
I feel like we either got it very late 85 or early 86, because I remember, because they kind of tried to do first they tried to do sort of the MTV sort of format of like they had like VJs. And I remember Don Imus was one of the VJs, I remember.
On VH1?
And
wow.
On VH1, and he was complaining about like he's basically doing his Imus shtick of being cranky, and he's like, here's Diana Ross, and then they would show like the Diana Ross.
There is an
video
interesting distinction here on your brochure. It says that your MTV channel was stereo, so I'm assuming then that your VH1 channel was not.
Yeah, but it was probably at the time. Now I can't remember. This would have been around the time of like broadcast standards for stereo, so like they would just send the MTS signal kind of through the cable, and if you had but I don't know when they started doing that. I know by the time I actually had a stereo thing to receive stereo, which was actually through my VCR, that would have been 89, but I don't know when they switched over to being able to send the MTS, but I'm gonna guess at that time it was probably still an FM simulcast.
No, we didn't have VH1 for the longest time, even in New York. I don't think we got VH1 until sometime in 1993, 1994, maybe.
And another thing is VH1, when we got and we'll probably do that on part 2 when we talk about like comedy channels and everything. They did a sort of a 12-hour sort of channel share. It used to be a 24-hour VH1, and then they did like a channel share with like the comedy Central and whatever it was before, the Ha channel.
Well,
they would kind of
there were two channels. There was the Ha channel and the comedy channel, and then they merged and became.
Yeah, we got Ha when it started, and then when they merged, it it became, and then actually funnily enough, it was called CTV for a while, and then there was also a Christian channel called CTV.
Brahman told me an interesting story about that, where she came from, her neck of the woods, Michigan. They had the Ha channel, but they didn't have the comedy channel. And then when they merged,
that was what we had. Yeah,
but then when they merged and became Comedy Central, it was unavailable there.
Well, that sucks.
Yeah, I know. But what's even more sucky is the fact that like the guys who made Mystery Science Theater. When their show switched over to Comedy Central, they didn't get it where they were in Minnesota.
Well,
so they weren't able to even watch the product of their work, which was kind of good for them in a way, because they could live anonymously in their section of Minnesota rather, like in Eden Prairie. They could go. Could just go out. VH1 launched because even at that time, MTV was becoming the subject of complaints because their VJs were getting more hype and attention than the videos they introduced. This more adult-oriented version of MTV comes out, but their demographic was still 18 to 35. They were trying to, I guess, maybe because MTV was going in an unusual direction, because they started producing original content, and they were packaging their music videos in formats. So they had hosts like, if you remember Julie Brown, you remember Downtown Julie Brown.
Downtown Julie Brown and
Duff,
and this
Karen
also,
Bryant, Kennedy. You had shows like MTV Spring Break and the MTV News with Kurt Loder. So
I remember they did the whole sort of we're gonna find a new VJ, and it was Kevin Seals. I remember him, and he's actually like a local guy, I think.
Who was that weirdo? There was a.
I know who you're talking. Duffy.
No, it wasn't Duff. No, it was a guy. It was a weird.
It was this weird. I know what you're talking about, like a sort of weird skinny dude.
I
can't remember
the
his name.
weird guy from.
That would have been in the 90s, but yeah.
VH1 comes along, and I remember when we finally got VH1. It was around Christmas time of whatever year it was, and they showed all these Christmas videos. So it was like, and it was weird because you would see stuff that MTV played years before but never played again.
Did they show like the Bryan Adams having a reggae Christmas with Pee Wee Herman? Did they show that one?
No, I don't remember that. I do remember Hall & Oates though. Hall & Oates. And, and then you had VH1 Storytellers. That was the show that came on. But mainly at that time in the 90s, they started to serve the purpose of filling that empty slot that MTV was moving away from videos. They were showing more videos, and then a few years later they start VH1 Classics, which
that was when everything kind of went digital, where they could like shave off like all these digital channels and just show videos.
Well, we have the channel. It is in HD though.
Yeah,
but I also know that a lot of the sound quality on these old videos, I don't know what they did. They didn't do anything. They didn't do any kind of cleanup, and these videos are degrading, and they're starting to look terrible and sound terrible too.
My guess is a lot of these old, and they may have been transferred to digital, but they're probably like these old sort of 3/4 inch, maybe 1 inch tape masters, where maybe they put like noise reduction, but like at the time, what kind of fidelity did people have?
It would only,
so if you just kind of got it in,
it could only be as good as what they had. Their original master would be like a U-Matic or something, because U-Matics were the perfect size for music videos. Behind the Music, I remember that is a popcorn show if there ever was one. You are just sitting there, and it's always the same story. It's always the same story. It's like this: they get together, they're in the garage, and they start strumming a few chords, and suddenly that's the #1 hit record, and they become big stars, and then there's fighting and the money problems, and one of them becomes a born again Christian, and the other one becomes a heroin addict, and he kills the guy. Leif Garrett, remember Leif Garrett? The story of
Leif Garrett. Oh, so sad.
Leif, I just want you to know, I forgive you, man. I forgive you.
I remember that one.
Don't do this to me, man. No, I forgive you, man. I forgive you.
Gosh darn it. I just remember something. Breaking Bonaducci. That was a VH1.
Breaking Bonaducci. Yes. How about the VH1 Behind the Music of the Partridge Family? And then Shirley Jones calls her a bitch right in front of me.
Not to mention the classic, I got to have more cowbell.
I need more cowbell. Yeah, Behind the Music was so much fun because it was always the same. And she fell in love with him, and they broke up, and it was terrible. And then what's her name? Lisa Left Eye set this guy's house on fire and all that. It's just like, what the fuck? TNT, Turner Network Television. We talked a little bit about that last week. It's pretty much what you think it is. It's a spillover station for everything else Ted Turner owned.
And what I remembered was he had TNT, and then he ended up, through serious, negotiations, he ended up buying pretty much the whole MGM library. And then he couldn't just show movies all day on TBS because it was like an overall channel. So I think he's part of why he started TNT was like he has a showcase for all of his MGM stuff.
And
so he could just,
in addition to that, it will go and play sometimes if TBS is showing something else, like having a special premiere. They produce original programming, and sometimes TBS will show that programming as a lead-in for the network to sell it, and then sometimes it's the other way around.
And also TNT. I mean, we didn't get TNT until when did it start? Do you have any information when it started? When TNT started?
1988. It started in 1988.
Yeah, we got it very early 90. And what I remember was when we first got it, I'm like, cartoons. They were showing cartoons, and they were also showing, I think, reruns of Fraggle Rock. Or something. Basically movies and stuff that could get cheap, I'm gonna guess.
And then they also did division series for baseball and playoff basketball games.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting, TBS showed the All-Star game last night. I believe it was last night. Now they do a combination of everything that TBS does. In addition, they show the Star Wars movies. They show them a lot. They also show Christmas Story, of course, perennial favorite.
Yeah, that's.
And right now they're producing Animal Kingdom, Claus, and I Am the Night with Chris Pine. But
that looked good. I kind of want to see that.
I looked at the pilot. I don't know.
They have many sort of like one season shows that they start that don't go anywhere.
Well, they did a whole I really enjoyed The Alienist. But they didn't classify it as a series. They classified it as a mini series, even though each episode was an hour long.
Well, it's like a lot of these shows are like one-off seasons. Like they'll have like an actor, and it's almost like they make it like a movie, but they just stretch it out. They are sort of like limited. Let's say like limited series event.
They might even begin a show with a series of movies and then go to series like The Librarians.
Yes,
this show with Noah Wyle that I believe was produced by Jonathan Frakes. And
and I do wonder, like Noah Wyle is. Does he make more money from this? Because I'm sure he's like a co-producer now on that show.
Yeah.
I'm wondering does he make more money from these librarian things than he made from ER?
Oh, definitely.
ER near the end, everybody was probably making a ton of money.
Oh yeah, but he was now the ER show begins with his character getting that job and showing up on the first day. Because he is meant to be the Michael Crichton analog. Basically, ER is based on Michael Crichton's experiences working in an emergency room when he was a doctor before he became a filmmaker and an author. So Noah Wyle was basically him for that show. And then he became the star of ER. Of course, he received an enormous pay bump after Clooney and Anthony Edwards left. But now he's kind of gotten into producing, and he does
the librarian stuff, and he gets a piece of that. So
he gets a piece of it. I don't think he's on the show anymore, but he does get a piece of it. And they had shows called Rizzoli and Isles, Franklin and Bash. I never watched them. I always saw ads for them, and this was something that I wasn't even aware of. But they produced the final season of Babylon 5, and then a series of movies that completed the story.
Yeah, it was part of I remember it because it was part of an overall deal where Babylon 5 was always just sort of barely hanging on the whatever would eventually become the WB. It was like part of this PTEN network, Primetime. No, wait, that's
Prime Entertainment. Babylon 5 was a syndicated show, right?
It was part of a Warner Brothers package.
Okay, it was Warner Brothers
that they would sell. It was on like it switched stations locally when It was like it was on channel 11 for a while, and then it was on channel 10 for like the last couple seasons. And
well, that's your local thing. I think Babylon 5 played on channel 9 here.
Yeah, it may have stayed there the whole time.
But channel 9 would show some stuff that was kind of syndicated, but part of a package produced by a studio. I'm thinking of. Do you remember a show called She-Wolf of London? And they came from outer space. And then there was, of course, Universal had its own package with Xena and Hercules.
Xena I remember that it was
Babylon 5 part of a studio syndicated package?
Yeah, it was a Warner Brothers thing because it was a Warner Brothers produced show. I think that what happened was it was that, and they brought back Kung Fu. It was Kung Fu: The Legend Continues, and that ran for 4 years along with Babylon 5. It was part of that package.
Oh, okay.
And so they would show that, but then nobody watched. I was the only one that watched, and then it got canceled. Just barely. It was always barely hanging on, always on the edge of cancellation.
I remember it being very, very popular. It's just that it probably costs a lot of money. I mean, when I compare,
no, it didn't. It was we were talking about like budgets of shows. It only had a $800,000 an episode.
But the one thing I can say about Babylon 5, looking at it, is that the visual effects looked far superior to a lot of the Star Trek stuff.
They made some sort of special deal where they did some sort of like they were all computer generated, very very similar to say like Last Starfighter.
But they looked less.
They were good enough. They were good enough, and because they did them on computer, they were able to do much more extravagant things than you would get on a Star Trek because they used models at the time. And then they brought this show in called Crusade.
Yeah, I remember Crusade. Gary Cole.
That was a great show.
Was Gary Cole in that?
Gary Cole, and they had a whole sort of side story where he had this like apocalypse box, and how he got the box from.
Yeah, they showed Crusade as part of reruns on Sci-Fi. I remember seeing a couple of episodes.
Who was the guy? Who was the Jekyll and Hyde together again guy? I can't remember his name.
Mark Blankfield.
He was the guy that gave him like the mystery box or something. And he was all crazy, and I'm like, it's the guy.
Crusade can be like considered the beginning of this whole new obsession with that time period and what probably brought Game of Thrones over and things like that.
It could be, but
because that's another movie. It's another show rather that
it was canceled.
Had very good production values.
It was canceled before it even aired. Like by the time I kept hearing, "Oh, it's coming, it's coming."
Yeah, there's only like a handful of episodes.
13 episodes. They burned them off. It was a great show. It had so much potential.
It also had a couple of people who would go on to become famous, really famous, from what I remember, and guest starring roles.
And a side note, I remember one of the episodes was directed by Tony Dow.
Yes,
that's stuck in my head.
Tony Dow also directed a Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, he's a popular director.
He's Wally. Well, gee, Beaver, maybe you ought to stop touching it and it won't get infected.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to TCM, Turner Classic Movies, which is still, for my money, the best channel on cable television because it's uncut, uninterrupted movies. Yeah, great selection.
I think that's more sort of what the original idea of TNT was going to be, where it's let's just show old classic movies that we own.
I love it, especially in October. You know, they show all these great horror movies. They're all restored. They don't look like crap. You can get.
It's kind of, I would say it's kind of similar to what AMC, and we'll get to AMC, but it's kind of similar to what AMC was going for with older films and classic films and things like that.
And then they'll do like around Alfred Hitchcock's birthday, they'll do a whole marathon of Alfred Hitchcock movies. Fantastic.
Yeah,
it's a great channel. I love it, and every time I always make a point because as you know, we live in a guideless culture. There's no paper anymore. Nobody's sending out guides. You have no idea what's on cable, and I don't want to flip through that preview guide all day to look for shit. So a lot of times the cable channels will have their schedules up there, so you can look right away, and you can even search. But I always make a point to go to the TCM site to see what they're showing. And it's always something that just comes up, and it's fantastic. And sometimes you'll find stuff you can't find, like on DVD or Blu-ray.
Now, when you're watching TCM now, they take classics, and remember, like a classic could be literally like something from the 80s now.
Oh yeah, well hell, they'll even show movies from the early 90s. I think one time they even showed like the Home Alone movies. They'll show them uncut and on uninterrupted. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. They'll even show Home Alone 3. Moving on, I guess, to AMC, American Movie Classics, a variation on TCM. But it came out before. I believe it came out before TCM came out.
And they're part of Bravo now. Like they're all owned by NBC now. It's like different companies have bought them up since. But AMC was I think it was called Rainbow Media.
Yes,
it might have been the company that Bravo. And like I told you, like I had early memories of AMC when I got it in '89, and when we got it in '89, it was like a channel share between that and we'll probably get to it, the E channel, what was the E channel, but was called Movie Time. And we were talking about EPKs, and like, yeah, they would just show like promotional material all the time. Actually, funny thing is, I actually have a VHS tape of like a recording of Movie Time, about an hour's worth, I'd say. I just found it recently, and it's got like all the EPK kits, and it was Mayim Bialik talking about her new sitcom. It's called Malloy. I think she's just coming off of
Blossom, was it?
It was pre-Blossom. It's basically Blossom, but another show. What was that show? What was that movie? Beaches. She's like probably just coming off of Beaches, and they's like, oh, this is the new thing, so we're gonna give her a show, and it was on Fox Network, and I think it only lasted like a few episodes. So it's like stuff like that, of like just like promotional stuff for various shows and movies and things.
Well, I mean, AMC always had a good selection of movies like TCM, but as far as I know, they weren't cut, but there were commercials.
No, they weren't. In fact, I remember because we had a recording they showed Young Frankenstein, and this would have been '89, so that wasn't too old of a movie at the time. And they left all the few swear words that were in it. They left in. I remember.
Now, I wanted to mention Bob Dorian, who was one of the hosts. Now, if we remember AMC for one reason. There's always a well-dressed older gentleman sitting in a chair by a fire with a book in his hand, talking about the next movie that's coming on. Coming up next on AMC, we're going to look at West Side Story. It was a very interesting story about Robert Wise, who directed the movie. He had an infection or something like that. He would tell you a little trivia about it. Now,
they brought in First, they brought in They brought in Robert Osborne.
Now, Bob Dorian, though, was the voice. Bob Dorian was the voice in the movie Evil Dead when Ash plays the tape.
Plays the tape recorder. I'll have to go back.
Talking about the scientist's research into the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead. That is the voice of Bob Dorian.
They also brought in. I remember they brought in the George Clooney's dad. He did those sort of bumper things for a while. I remember.
Yeah, and then later Robert Osborne. I believe Robert Osborne is still doing it. And sometimes they bring in guests like pop culture commentators or movie critics.
Yeah, but AMC is way less about what their name is, and they're more just they're AMC. They're not necessarily American Movie Classics.
No, they are. They are so not American Movie Classics anymore because of all of these programs that people just watch. They go nuts.
They're great shows. Look, they're great shows. I love the Breaking Bad. I love the Better Call Saul.
Well, do you remember a show? One of their first original shows was a show called Remember When, WENN. It was about an old time radio station back in the 40s, and it was a series, and it was actually very popular, but it didn't last very long.
Was this pre-Mad Men?
Yes, it was pre-Mad Men.
I think Mad Men is what put them on the map.
This is back in the 90s, It was like in the late 90s, I think, is when that show was on. And then, of course, Mad Men comes out. You got the
Mad Men. I think that's when it changed.
The Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. We didn't watch any of. The only show that me and Bronwyn watched was The Preacher, and the only reason we watched that is because she read the graphic novel. She was a fan of the graphic novels, and so we watched The Preacher. Now, this is really shocking to me because a lot of the stuff that you'll see on AMC is it's very violent. It's loaded with bad language. There's sex. Sometimes there's a little bit of nudity. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
it's
they're slowly like they're dropping F-bombs now. That's okay.
And you wouldn't believe. I mean, like I don't watch The Walking Dead. I don't watch Breaking Bad. I don't watch any. But on The Preacher, I was so shocked at the amount of violence. There was so much graphic.
Violence is fine. Nobody gives a shit about violence.
But it's like more violent than movies that are being put out in theaters.
That's true.
Today.
Well, I mean, this is the channel that gives you Walking Dead, where they don't care. It's guts and like grossness, and yeah.
It's very interesting that AMC is doing this now. That a lot of these channels move away from their original mandates. It's like. Sci-fi moved away from science fiction. The Food Network.
Yeah, I see stuff on sci-fi where I'm like, that's not science fiction at all.
You see, and then this is American Movie Classics, AMC, to distinguish itself from movies like KFC distinguishes itself from fried chicken.
But that's still why you go there.
It winds up becoming something completely different. At least Turner Classic Movies is still classic movies.
Yeah, you pretty much know what you're going to get. You're going to get an older movie. You're going to get a as close to well preserved.
If you went to AMC 30 years ago and said, "I've got a great idea for a TV show you guys should be running," AMC would say, "Excuse me, do you see the name of our network? It's called American Movie Classics."
Well, also they didn't have any money because that was before they were owned by bigger corporate entities. They were Rainbow Media.
All these
had no
shows,
money at all.
These shows, I will say, look great. They look expensive. They have like really great the talent behind the people that make The Preacher. I think Seth Rogen and his writing partner created the show. You know, it's very well made stuff. That's what AMC has become. They've become kind of like what every channel is wanting to become, including the next channel we're going to talk about on the list, which is IFC, the Independent Film Channel. They
were kind of, I mean, we'll probably get to it. Like, they were almost like they ended up getting almost answered because they would show they were the Independent Film Channel, but then like there was the Sundance Channel.
Yeah, there was.
And they eventually like they would end up buying because like.
But the problem was at the time we didn't have the Sundance Channel because it was a premium service.
Yeah, it was part of the Showtime networks. It's no longer, I think, part of the Showtime networks, but they're actually part of the whole sort of IFC, AMC, Bravo.
And plus, it wasn't really in my wheelhouse because it was kind of, Sundance was very much kind of, I felt that Sundance, their attitude compared to IFC, they had a very snooty attitude about film. They were like, film, yes, Pauline Kael, you know, it's a great cinema, and all that stuff. Whereas IFC was like, they would show really a lot of like fun movies that you couldn't find on cable stations. IFC, okay, was the greatest cable channel in the universe until roughly 2010. They started censoring their movies, and they started adding commercials.
Yeah.
And they ruin it, and you ruin it for me when you do it like that, because this is a cable station. You're paying for it. You are paying for it. In addition, they're getting ad revenue. And then they're cutting and adding commercials to everything.
Well, and
it ruins it for me.
That was probably around the time of like I'm thinking because they had a very popular show called Portlandia.
Well, yeah, Portlandia.
That was an IFC show.
That came out the next year, and I loved Portlandia. Yeah. Portlandia was one of my favorite.
Yeah, if you want to
things.
know what it's like here in the Northwest, that is very close. It's very painfully close.
Yeah, but some of the stories you tell me are. It's not the stuff they show in Portlandia. You tell me a lot about crime, and you tell me a lot about drugs, and you tell me a lot about homeless
in
people.
Sort of sections. Portland. I'm talking.
Whereas
like,
in Portlandia, it seems to be like this white utopia of leftist liberal politics. That was one of the funniest shows. That seriously was one of the funniest shows on television at the time. There was another show that was really good on FX called Man Seeking Woman. It was fantastic as well.
I love that show. I've watched all of them. I think it's canceled by now.
I don't know what happened. He got married. If you get married, you're not a man seeking a woman anymore. Now you're a husband seeking wife. Portlandia became a show that was eaten by its own, the left wing, because they started to, I guess, we're getting into kind of the social justice warrior phase.
It's funny because they used to do they did and they did them till the end. They did these sort of pissed off, angry lesbian bookstore owners.
Yeah.
But they shot it at a specific bookstore, and then I guess that they were making fun of them too much because the bookstore got all pissed off and said you can't do this anymore.
Yeah, so the town wound up getting upset at them for making fun, even though that's what the show's about. It is a great show that poked fun at liberal ideals, and it was like one of these what black people think white people talk about kind of shows, where you're
a lot of that going on though. I mean, like I said, like okay, we have sort of crime pockets here, but if you want to sort of like imagine Portlandia, but then if you put that in sort of Seattle, there's like chunks of Seattle that are very sort of Portlandia-ish. But then the rest of it's like imagine like I keep thinking of like the bad guy in Darkman, like he wanted to have this big building, or maybe like OCP.
Talking about Larry Drake from
not Larry Drake, the megalomaniac that was making this big like look at it, it's all mine, ha ha, and then Darkman swoops in. But it's kind of like I'm thinking more maybe the old man from OCP.
Okay.
In RoboCop, like that's basically what Seattle is becoming, is this like this like all corporate entity owned city, almost like
okay. I'm an East Coast guy, so when I think about Seattle, I think about two things. I think about Frasier and I think about Nirvana. So I think about the scene of grunge music, and then I think about the quirky comedy of Frasier.
Dude, that was like 25 years ago.
But that's all I have to go on. I'm in the East Coast.
I know.
Hey, what do you think about when you think about New York? You probably think about, Robert De Niro and, John Travolta in tight pants dancing.
I think of Mean Streets. I think
I want to be a dancer. What the fuck? What are you doing over here?
Wish. Hey. I know it's not like that anymore because, they came in and had draconian, and they came in and cleaned it up and shipped off all the homeless people to some other city or something.
To your city. We shipped them off to your city. IFC was so awesome. I used to record movies off of it. Well, I still have VHS tapes of movies recorded off of IFC. One of them I used to write up a vintage cable box review. I did my review of Repo Man, and the tape had Repo Man, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978, and the Harmony Korine movie, Gummo, all in EP mode. You know, it's an old tape, and it still works too, by the way, because I looked at the tape to do the review. You don't find that eclectic combination of, you got Repo Man, Invasion of Body Snatchers, and Gummo, and I think I recorded them within 2 days. So
that feels very sort of early the movie channel.
Yes, very much so. It was very much like the movie, and you could get like all of these movies and just go nuts with your tape machine, because a lot of the premium channels wouldn't even show them. You know,
I guess they got them cheap. I guess they get them as like these. I guess the kind of movies that you would get now on like a Criterion Collection kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like a lot of the stuff that'd be on IFC, but you could probably get a Criterion Collection version.
Speaking of, I think Criterion has a collection of these 3 movies that we went to see, me and Bronwyn, back in 1999. This is before we got married. I think we were engaged at the time. IFC sponsored a one-time screening of Harold and Maude, Polyester, and The King of Comedy at the Ziegfeld Theater, which was one of the great old theaters in New York. And I still have the original Odorama card for Polyester. It's over in my it's in.
And I'm gonna around that time. Did anybody get shot? Was there a drive-by?
No. This was New York, man. I mean, it was.
So the Waynes weren't shot in a dark alley or anything like that.
This was whereabouts was it? It was like, oh God, 54th Street off of Broadway, near Hell's Kitchen, not too west on the west side, but. It was a nice neighborhood, and I always loved to go to the Ziegfeld. It was one of my favorite theaters in New York. I saw a lot of movies there. What did I see there? I saw Jurassic Park there. I saw Carlito's Way, A Bronx Tale. I believe I might have even seen Schindler's List there. I mean, I've seen that was back when going to movies was a lot of fun and didn't cost that much money. I think you could get into the Ziegfeld for like, you know, $7 or something.
Wow.
Now, the IFC also had a film center, the Angelica Film Center down in Lower Manhattan, that IFC bought, and they turned it into the IFC Film Center, and I saw a couple of movies down there, too. I believe I saw Neil LaBoute's first movie, In the Company of Men.
Oh, that's a great date movie.
Yeah. but IFC was so awesome. And then they start tinkering, like every station that we've mentioned, with the exception of Turner Classics. They started tinkering and started making original series. So you get a lot of quirky kind of comedy stuff.
Eventually, you can't just keep losing money. You have to make money. So do they have their audience? They make money. It's kind of the point.
I can't imagine that they get the kind of ratings that one of the big 3 or the big 4 or 5 networks.
No, but if they put commercials on it, now they get a few shows that people like
IFC was like Z Channel. You remember Z Channel? We talked about that.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah.
Kind of like this, you know, just an unusual assortment of movies. Sometimes
the kind of place where you would see like a director's cut of a movie that you wouldn't see anywhere else.
Yeah, or a documentary about a filmmaker, a good documentary. I remember there was the Z Channel documentary actually was on IFC.
You're right. That's where I saw it. Yeah. I remember that would have been 2005.
And there was a documentary on Sam Fuller, the filmmaker who directed that movie we talked about with Christy McNichol, White Dog.
Yeah.
Tim Robbins and Quentin Tarantino produced that documentary. And you would also see like stuff like Heaven's Gate. You would see controversial films. Yeah. You know, and it's just so much fun. Now you don't get that. Now you get kind of like the Weird Adventures of Todd Margaret or whatever the fuck that show's called.
Yeah.
There was a good show, Greg the Bunny, which started on IFC and then went over to Fox and then was canceled from Fox and went back to IFC. All right, so we move on to the Discovery Channel, which had been around for several years. Actually, it started in 1982 as the cable educational network. BBC and BBC Ventures America were investors. They started the channel. It began broadcasting in 1985, and it was only on for 12 hours a day. And it was nature shows a lot of time. When it started, it was nature shows. It was animal shows, National Geographic specials until, you know.
I remember a lot of like basically again stuff they could get cheap, like a lot of
Jacques Cousteau.
British programming. I remember like British documentaries, Australian documentaries, like science programs from Australia. A lot of Australian stuff for some reason. I'm remembering this show called like Beyond Tomorrow or something, like I think it was called Future Scan or something. It was like these Australian, you know, science programs. I remember a lot of documentaries, and things like that. Yeah,
but we didn't really get into it until it turned into this really fun thing that combined kind of a reality entertainment with education. So it was like from 2002 to 2010, it was probably the single most watched cable channel in our home because it had shows like Mythbusters and American Chopper.
It's the sort of thing you can have a kid watch it and not feel like something weird's going to happen or they're going to see something. It's like they're going to learn something.
Yeah,
and you're going to learn something.
Well, I was fascinated by a lot of that stuff. There was also Shark Week.
Yes,
that was the big thing with Shark Week. There was a show called Monster House that we watched. Well, Mythbusters I want to talk about just for a second. It was a really fun show because you had the two hosts, Adam and Jamie, very much like The Odd Couple, and then they had their whole crew. And then they would pick some weird kind of what it was originally was kind of like this urban legend thing where they tried to prove the legend existed or that it was impossible, and they'd use science, and you'd learn so much shit about it. Like I believe the first episode they did was it centered around pop rocks. The urban legend myth of pop rocks, that if you mix pop rocks with soda, your stomach will explode. So they actually they bought an actual stomach, like a pig's stomach, I think, and then they put in a new esophagus, and then they took this big hypodermic needle. They shoved pop rocks into it, mixed with Coca-Cola, shoved it into the. They shoved it,
and it didn't explode, did it?
Well, it did. There was so much pressure built up in the pig's stomach that it caused the pig's stomach to become distended and then pop a hole in it. So they but that was because they were applying so much force. And I have a feeling that if you tried to do it yourself, I don't think your stomach would explode. You might have a lot of bubbling going on.
You have a lot of bubbling, probably a lot of gas.
Yeah, a lot of gas.
Probably some puking. I would think that's how the body works. If it doesn't like what's going on, you'll puke.
Yeah. And that's part of what happened. And also artificial farting was happening too with this rig that they had set up. Now, okay. Getting into American Chopper, did you ever watch that? You get screaming New York motorcycle guys. They build. Yeah,
that's the very popular meme with the father and the son arguing, where they cut things together of people arguing about Star Wars or Star Trek or whatever.
Yes,
it's always funny.
Those are the adventures of the Tuttles up in Montgomery County, New York, where they custom make all these really nice looking. I'm not big on motorcycles myself. I've ridden them on occasion, and I'm not a big fan of motorcycles, but we found them so fucking entertaining. Mostly Paul Jr. and Paul Sr. just yelling and screaming at each other. And then there was another show called Monster House, where this guy, the host Steve, would get together builders from across the country to build weird additions to people's houses. Again, a lot of fun. Didn't last very long, that show. This was the love affair that we had with this kind of combination of reality programming, entertainment, of course, and education, because you learn a lot watching these people do this shit. So fucking crazy. There's like another show called American Hot Rod, where they would rebuild these custom cars and all this stuff. Oh, and then there was Deadliest Catch. You remember that?
Yeah.
And it showed just how dangerous it was to go out.
Oh yeah, and we've lost many. I think we've lost a few people from that show, like over the years,
just
because
dying. They died.
They died.
Their jobs were so. I mean, yeah. If you survived, it was a nice payout, and it was always a gamble, because they go out on the boat, and whatever their paycheck is how many of these crabs they can catch, right? So they're catching all these crabs, and if they can't catch enough crabs, they have a rotten season. And if they do catch a lot of crabs, they wind up with a shitload of money. But then they could also die.
I don't know if that's worth the risk. Do like I do. Get a regular job and be safe, please.
Okay, dude, you work in a supermarket, right? You're selling what they caught. You need to have.
That's not my department. That's not my department.
Okay, well, whatever. You're getting paid because they got paid.
Yeah.
They sold their shit. Their shit gets sold to you. You sell that shit to the people around you. And it's a food chain. I mean, that's absolutely.
It is a food chain. Yes, I understand that.
You remember Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe? I mean, he would go on about these horrible, what sounded like horrible jobs, but it's honest work, and it needed to be done.
I have no problem with honest work. It's just if anything involving something gross or stinky or anything like that,
cleaning toilets,
cleaning toilets, I'm like that's kind of my limit.
Okay, so we now we go into Discovery is like this big, massive.
Now it's a big thing. They're Discovery Networks. I think they own BBC America now.
Yes.
They're like
Discovery Kids, Discovery Travel, Kids. Discovery Civilization, and the Science Channel. Some of those are digital. I think we might have HD feeds of those.
The Learning Channel. They bought up the Learning Channel.
The Learning Channel, which we'll get into next week. I did watch a show on that. I watched a couple of shows on that. And then in 2009, a very curious thing happened. Hasbro, the toy company, merged with Discovery Kids to form a network called Hub, so that they could show cartoons based on their toys. You would see shows like, Regan watched it because My Little Pony. She was very big on My Little Pony, little girl and all that, horses and crap.
Well, see, she's the target audience, not grown men our age that seem to be into it now. That's a
But
weird
I had
thing.
okay. This is the curious phenomenon of parents watching kids programming. I would sit there because I had to take care of her. So I had to take care of her. I had to make sure she was fed. I had to change her diapers. I had to wipe her ass. I had to train her to use the potty. All the time we kept on this network, the Hub network. She'd be watching My Little Pony. Sometimes old G.I. Joe episodes would pop up, of course, because it's Hasbro. Transformers episodes, so I'd be watching. And it's a weird thing that happens when you're a parent and you're taking care of your kid and you're watching this shit. And it gets even more uncomfortable when we get into our next topic, our final topic for the episode. Watching it can really kind of, especially if you're an adult, it can really stunt your mental process because you wind up like Jack Torrance in The Shining, where he's just staring off into the distance at nothing, going completely out of his mind as Kubrick is zooming the camera in on his face. That is exactly what happens when you get into Disney. It becomes, Disney is a very interesting story. How the Disney Channel started. It started as a premium service. We talked about this before. We did an episode of our history of video, and we talked about Disney. And we had on as our guest Gino Cuddy, who's an expert in Disney, and believe me, the guy is an expert.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question here. You remember, we haven't talked about this yet, but do you remember the free preview weekends that we would often get when we had cable service?
Okay, here's what I remember. When Disney Channel started, actually to sort of pre-Disney Channel, they would show some Disney stuff on HBO. I remember that. Like we talked about that on an HBO show.
The Freaky Fridays, the Captain.
And then around 82, I think 82, 83, they started their own channel, and it became a premium channel.
April 18th, 1983.
They launched it with new episodes of Still the Beaver. I remember that.
Still the Beaver.
And because it had been like a TV movie. It was a TV movie that was back to Tony Dow.
Yeah.
It was a TV movie that was very popular when they brought it back. Like I think it was called Still the Beaver or like something like that.
Well, Still the Beaver started as a movie.
Yeah.
Ward is dead. They finally killed him. They cut off his head to separate him from the body. They buried him. And June and everybody. Wally can't have a kid with his wife. Meanwhile, Beaver has knocked up his wife several times.
Something like that.
Yes.
And so it was very popular, and they brought it back as a show, and somehow it ended up on the Disney Channel.
Yeah.
And then I think they called it Still the Beaver for a while, and then they started calling it like the new Leave It to Beaver after a couple of years or something. And
from the original title, the original title of the show was Ward, I think you were a little hard on the Beaver.
Hey-oh!
Boom boom.
That was kind of like their the new original programming of like Still the Beaver, and then they would show a lot of like their Disney TV movies that they would make over the years. They'd show that basically whatever they could get that was Disney.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that because when we got our cable, we didn't have the Disney Channel because it was premium. But when they did the free preview weekend, they had the Disney Channel on it, and they showed Still the Beaver, and we got to see it.
And there was that. I think they showed like the premiere of Tron. So like any sort of newer. And remember, this was the early '80s Disney that they didn't necessarily crank out a ton of movies at the time.
They didn't show the classic movies though. I mean, they didn't show the.
They didn't because they probably had these side because they would show up on TV and they'd make more money doing that. Yeah. So they kind of like slowly morphed it. But they show like stuff that wasn't great, like Devil Next Devlin.
Yeah.
Like I said, North Avenue Regulars, maybe Freaky Friday, and what's the other one?
Just that live action stuff. They didn't show the classic
live action stuff that was like mid '70s stuff.
Movies, no.
And they would show that, and then they would have their original programming. Like in the morning, they had like I'm thinking.
But
like
it was only a 16-hour day. But it was it
wasn't a ton of stuff.
You had to pay for it, and it wasn't even 24 hours.
And then I think by the time they get to the mid '90s, I think they realized their business plan was let's just put commercials on it.
Well, actually, I have a little bit of dirt here on that.
Okay.
They see what they wanted was they wanted HBO money. Every premium service wanted.
They're making more than HBO money now.
The kind of money that HBO made, and they only had by 1983 500,000 subscribers. So what happened was in September of 1990, a cable service in Montgomery, Alabama, just switched it to a basic cable service. And they did it without Disney's consent because then they were adding on their own commercials. So they added on the commercials. They basically cut a check to Disney and said, okay, here's your licensing fee and here's the money we're making from advertising. They looked at this check and I think that they were like, holy shit, this is real money. So I think that you had a boardroom at the Disney company where half of the people on the board wanted it to remain in premium service, and the other half said, let's just go the full route, make it basic, go full time, and add commercials to it. We'll make shitloads of money more, and then we can add in more stuff and we can actually get advertiser dollars. So I guess money wins.
Yeah, it's eventually they got to make money. That's all I can say. They got to make money. If it's not making money, they got to figure out another way. Now, of course, Disney is like a massive entity now.
They're a monster. And then they added on extra channels when my daughter was growing up. Disney XD, Disney Junior, Disney Jailbait, 2 sister channels to Disney. I call it Disney Jailbait because there were these shows with these chicks. To quote Will Smith from Men in Black, "Damn," and it's frustrating.
They're chicks. Are they girls? Are they women?
It's creepy as hell. Well, Disney in the '90s had people like I sent you a picture on the Mickey Mouse Club. You had Christina Aguilera. You had Britney Spears, you had Justin Timberlake, and you had Ryan Gosling. Ryan Gosling and Justin Timberlake basically look like younger versions of themselves, of course. But, I had a serious thing for Christina Aguilera.
Yeah, and she was not legal at the time.
She was not legal. She's probably still not legal for me. But luckily, we were spared Hannah Montana because I guess Regan wasn't interested in that. But Selena Gomez became a ubiquitous presence in our house. All these hot chicks on these shows. It was very strange for me. How old was I when Regan was born? It was 2006. I think I was 33 or 34.
All right, so ogling these girls is not necessarily the most appropriate.
I was pushing 40 at the time, and you got these 20-year-olds, 19, 18-year-old hotties, and they're parading all over the place. And here is a nice little compilation of what I, in my research, what I found.
All right. Wow!
That was good.
Wowie, wowie, wow!
Wowie, wowie, wow. Okay, that was so good we don't even need a take 2. So Disney had shows like The Witches of Waverly Place, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, The Sweet Life on Deck, Pair of Kings, Shake It Up, Kickin' It, Lab Rats, Gravity Falls. Well, okay, I'll give you this. Now, their cartoons were a lot better than their live-action sitcoms because their live-action sitcoms were made for kids, so it's very much kind of like a bunch of Mary Sue characters running around with powers, with privilege, with a kind of, wish fulfillment thing going on. It's kind of like how Star Trek Discovery is written in a way. It's like people with powers who are wonderful all the time. Yeah. No matter what. But these are kids' fantasies, so it's kind of... But I want to say, the shows I really enjoyed were the cartoons. Phineas and Ferb was something that me and Regan could watch together, and we both enjoyed it for different reasons. It was actually a very clever cartoon, and very popular, too. It attracted a lot of, famous people. And we even have, I think, a couple of DVDs of Phineas and Ferb. And there was another show called Gravity Falls. It was really good.
Okay, we actually got it as a premium station. Relatively, I would say back 84-ish.
You actually paid. How much did it cost?
Oh, it might have been an extra. It couldn't have been more than $10 extra or something.
Okay, so yeah,
it was a tough sell. It was a tough sell, but I sold it because
I can't imagine it was 16 hours. They probably had limited programming that they repeated constantly, so you weren't going to pay HBO
but basically,
prices.
And I told you about sort of the weird layout of my cable box, where it was. I think they got rid of one channel that was in there because we only could have 5 premium channels.
Right.
Where you had 18 was Playboy, 19 was HBO, 20 would be Disney, 21 would be Showtime,
right,
and then 22 was Movie Channel. And we wouldn't get Disney until 84. Even on our service, maybe they came out in 83, and then we wouldn't get the Movie Channel even available till 86, and then 22 was, I believe, what was called the Super Channel, which was sort of the Sonics,
right,
Supersonic Super Channel that they got rid of, and then they had an extra channel. But the way that technically the box worked was you could only have premium channels in a chunk, because then it had some sort of weird crystal or something in it that was could activate in a certain sort of frequency.
Right.
So you only had a certain chunk of channels that could even be the premium. So they put it right in the middle. And
there's an interesting little thing here. There's an asterisk next to your Disney Channel where it says it's available only to full service subscribers. What's a full service subscriber?
I think that basically you would have to have a premium service to get that premium service.
Okay.
You couldn't just subscribe to get like the basic and then only subscribe to Disney. You'd have to actually have like HBO or Showtime or something.
We will be back next time to wrap up this whole thing already. Again, another really super long episode.
Yeah.
But I suppose I can do some.
You'll probably edit like large chunks of this. You may make other shows with. I mean, I went off on tangents about stuff. You may actually be able to make another show with it.
Probably, yeah. But we will be talking about the final channels of this lineup, which would be Sci-Fi and all the various comedy networks, as well as Cartoon Network, Learning Channel, Travel Channel, Court TV, True TV, and the Oxygen Network, a television for another group of idiots. Until that time, I am the Russian bot, David Lawler. I was joined by the NPC, David Anderson. As you can see, we're a lot happier now. Good night.
Good night.